And again, my name is Laura Wills, and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Relations. I am so excited about tonight's program. I've had a sneak peek of this story, and I can't wait for you to hear it as well. If you have a question, please use the Q&A button, not the chat button, and we'll get to as many questions as we can at the end of Rick's talk. Instead of me introducing tonight's speaker, I've asked my friend and former colleague, Pierce Bounds, class of 1971, to do the honor. He's a friend of Rick's and a fellow photographer, so I thought he'd be the perfect person to introduce Rick to you. Pierce, go ahead and take it away. Pierce, unmute your computer.
Yeah, you shadow puppets.
I'm doing it on my end, but it's not doing anything. Pierce, please unmute. Well, how about I go ahead and introduce Rick tonight? I know Pierce wanted to do it. Pierce and Rick have been friends since college. So, Pierce, I'm not sure.
What if Pierce logs off and then logs back in again?
Not sure. Pierce?
The demo gods at work.
Oh, I know. It worked earlier this week. Sorry, everybody. Well, I will go ahead. So Rick Smolan is the class of 1972. He's the CEO of Against All Odds Productions and a New York Times bestselling author with more than 5 million copies of his books in print. He's also a former Time, Life, and National Geographic photographer. His acclaimed global photography projects feature the works of hundreds of the world's leading photographers and combine creative storytelling with state-of-the-art technology. Rick is the author of a New York Times bestselling America 24/7, which enabled thousands of Americans to create a national family album during one ordinary week and was featured as one of Oprah Winfrey's favorite things. The Human Face of Big Data is a large format book and an iPad app, which won a Webby Award and an award-winning PBS TV special. His latest book, The Good Fight, America's Ongoing Struggle for Justice, has won numerous awards and has been featured in national news outlets. It was highlighted as one of People magazine's 10 best books of the year and as an official TED Book selection. It also includes a free app that enables readers to access short but powerful streaming videos related to select photos. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Rick Smolan.
Thanks very much, Laura. And it's very surreal doing a talk like this, since the only person I can see here is actually Laura. I'm imagining everybody else out there, and I'm sorry, Pierce, I couldn't zoom in here to join us. First of all, Pierce and I were both photographers at Dickinson, and if you look at any of the books I've done since I left Dickinson, they look very much like the yearbook that I did at Dickinson. The layout, the style, the format. I feel like there's an old joke about, like, when a duck is born, whatever it sees first, it thinks is its mother. And I feel like I've been basically repeating the Dickinson yearbook ever since. So thank you to Dickinson for that.
We might have Pierce here. Pierce?
Okay.
Unmute. Oh, I'm sorry, we're trying.
Okay, how about now?
There we go,
All
Pierce,
right,
go ahead.
Okay, shall I start with my introduction?
Of course, go right ahead.
Okay, well, welcome everyone, friends of Dickinson, Dickinsonians, and friends of Rick. I'm Pierce Bounds, as Laura already told you, a Dickinson class of 1971, former college photographer, continuing Department of Theater and Dance photographer, proud grandpa, and friend of Rick's. When Laura asked me in August if I could connect her with Rick Smolan about doing something virtual this fall, and would I introduce him, I said yes. After all, I've known Rick since 1968. Scary.
Wow.
I loved the 1972 Microcosm, which he's already mentioned, the college yearbook. We followed his worldwide adventures for 5 decades. We admired his photos in the 1977 National Geographic article about Robin Davidson crossing the Australian outback. And in subsequent shows, books, movies on the same subject, and watched a pre-Kylo Ren Adam Driver play Rick in the film Tracks. Read and placed many of his 80 plus books on my bookshelf, from A Day in the Life of Australia in 1981 to Jennifer and his book, The Good Fight, America's Ongoing Struggle for Justice in 2017. We watched as he was interviewed on the Today Show and many others. I listened as he told the story of his first and almost disastrously last time assignment to photograph Sarah Caldwell, a pioneering opera director with a famous dislike of photographers, who became Rick's good friend. We were intrigued by his groundbreaking use of technology, including in the books From Alice to Ocean and Inside Tracks. And this is going on too long, so most of all of that you can find on Google or Wikipedia. What you can't find is that Rick is the real deal, a genuine and nice person who convinced 100 photojournalists to travel to Australia to join a crazy project for no pay, but with a promise to share a room with a famous photojournalist at no extra cost. You won't find that he's a proud Dickinsonian and father who knows his children's college decisions are theirs alone, and that he's a true friend who will talk for an hour about everything from how you met your wife or partner, to how you were coping with a quarantine, to a really cool new piece of photo gear, to how amazing it is that small decisions and chance encounters can change the course of a life. So here's Rick to tell you of an encounter that lasted and changed the lives of Natasha, himself, and many others. Okay, Rick, thank you, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Pierce. I like the picture of Margaret as you're standing there. So thank you, Laura, and thank you, Pierce, for those kind introductions. I often think I have the best job in the world, and sometimes I think this is all a drug-induced hallucination, and I'm still back at Dickinson. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but I just did. So anyway, you know, sometimes I pinch myself that my fantasies when I was back at Dickinson was to become a globe-trotting photojournalist, and there was no photography program at Dickinson at the time that I attended, thanks to my father, who was completely adamant about me not being a photographer. So I was fortunate to work with a wonderful professor named Dennis Aiken, who let me create my own photography major within a week of getting to Dickinson, which infuriated my father to no end. At some point, he was eventually proud of me, but he thought of being a photographer as a very, you know, he just said you're going to end up doing baby portraits and weddings. That was not what he was sending me to college for. In any case, I wanted to share the story about Natasha and her impact on my life and the lives of her family and her friends. She's one of the most extraordinary people I've ever met, but I want to give you some quick background of what led to me meeting Natasha. And as I said, you know, sometimes I feel like my whole life has been a series of very strange juxtapositions where if I turn left instead of right, that everything you're about to see wouldn't have happened. So keep that in mind as I share the story. So when I was at Dickinson, my junior year, I lived in Bologna for the year. And I drove around Europe after I graduated. And the way that we used to get mail from our parents back then was to wait in line at American Express in different cities. And so I went to wait in line in Madrid to see if there's any letters from my parents. And standing in front of me were these two really beautiful Swedish girls who I was trying to talk to, and they were not remotely interested. And behind me was the gentleman on the right, Gene Driscoll, who was also trying to talk to these girls. And again, they were not particularly interested in Gene either. The two of us and a group of other people we met in line all went off to have dinner that night. And Gene became my best friend. He lived in Atlanta. We didn't live near each other. I have no idea sort of why that connection stuck the way it did. Gene was in many ways the big brother I always wished I had. We're about the same age, but Gene is much more mature. He was much more mature back then. He's remained to be much more mature. And there was just something that sort of bonded the two of us. So my first assignment after I left being the college photographer at Dickinson was to photograph two policemen who had seen flying saucer land somewhere outside of Carlisle. Carlisle, by the way, those of you not part of the Dickinson community, that's where we all went to college. That's where Dickinson is. And I was hired by the National Enquirer It was a test to see if I was good enough to work for them. And I got fired after taking this picture because I couldn't stop laughing at these guys. I love the chin strap that doesn't fit on the cop on the right. And this was the artist rendition of the flying saucer that they had seen. So my career did not start terribly well, getting fired after my first assignment. I did get hired. I took my yearbook to New York City, much to and now my own chagrin, because I didn't even have a portfolio. And I met with the director of photography at Time magazine. I managed to get an appointment. And I didn't find this out till years later, but he had a history of looking for one young, hungry photographer and throwing them out in the middle of the lake to see if they can sink or swim. I had basically only shot black and white, and suddenly he started giving me cover story assignments. And every time I got an assignment, I would go from elation, like, oh my God, this is so cool. I've got an assignment for Time magazine, to this sense of dread that I'm an imposter. I never studied photography. I've never taken a photography course. I have no idea what I'm doing, and they're going to find out I'm an imposter, and this will be the end of my career. So it always go this sort of, high to total despair, thinking if I do anything wrong, I'm going to blow it. I learned years later that I'm actually an adrenaline junkie. I'm much better when I'm scared to death. The picture in the middle was actually taken by the Prime Minister of Australia, and I'll get to that in a minute. I joined a group of photographers in New York City that formed an agency called Contact, and I was the baby of the group. It was Eddie Adams that took that very famous picture of the street shooting in Saigon, Douglas Kirkland, who did the famous picture of Marilyn Monroe wrapped in a sheet, David Burnett, a whole group of other wonderful photographers, and I was literally 5 or 10 years younger than most of the other photographers. And so I was sort of like, give it to Mikey and see if he'll eat it. Every assignment no one wanted to do, they gave to me. And one of the assignments was to fly on the first nonstop flight from New York to Tokyo. It was an 18-hour flight. The assignment was basically a press junket, where you would get on the flight, fly 18 hours, take a picture of 2 guys shaking hands in Tokyo, get back on the airplane and fly to New York. So nobody wanted to do this. I, of course, raised my hand and said, I'll take the ticket. I'd never been to Japan. I left on Monday telling my sister, whose couch I was sleeping on at that point in New York City, that I'd be back on Friday. And I came home 11 months later. The moment I got to Japan, I just fell in love with Asia. And then when Time magazine found out I was there, they started giving me assignments. One of the assignments was to spend a week traveling with the Prime Minister of Australia, who was on his way to China. He, for some reason, adopted me. I had hair down to here, as Pierce probably remembers. We were both kind of hippies back in that day. And the Prime Minister invited me to come to Australia as his guest. When I got to Australia, Time magazine, first of all, was thrilled that the Prime Minister had welcomed me into his sort of, entourage and his family. And so Time sent me to the Outback to do this cover story on Aborigines. I was supposed to meet a young woman who was a social worker, and I was supposed to, she told me, when you get to your hotel, make a right, walk down the street to a pub, and I'll meet you there. I have no sense of direction at all. So of course I got out of the hotel and made a left. And the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in my life was washing the windows of my hotel. So I took this picture of her, and she got really angry at me, started yelling at me to put my goddamn cameras down. Who the hell did I think I was? Someone taught me a long time ago that if you photograph somebody and they get upset, always walk over to them and apologize, because usually people think you're making fun of them if you take the picture and they get upset. So I went over there to apologize to her, and she immediately started yelling at me and asking if I was there to photograph Aborigines. And I said, yes, I'm here I work for Time magazine, thinking she'd be impressed. And she said, you goddamn parasites come in here every week. You take advantage of these poor people. You get paid all this money and you leave, Anyway, I apologized and left. And the woman I was working with, the social worker who I did find, we worked all day in the camps. We asked permission to photograph the tribal elders. And at the end of the day, she said, what are you doing tonight for dinner? And I said, I'm going to go back and work on captions in my hotel room. And she said, well, a group of us are gathering at a friend's house, and you might want to meet other people involved in the Aboriginal rights movement. So she gave me the address. I drove to this abandoned looking house. The roof was caved in. There's some cars parked in the front. I thought I probably had the directions wrong, but I kind of timidly knocked on the door. And of course, who answered the door but the girl who'd been washing the windows of my hotel. And she was not happy to see me, told me to put my cameras down, and told me I could not photograph her friends. And when I walked into the back of her house, she had camels tied up, and I asked why she had camels, and she said it was none of my business. I went to the woman who had been working for me and said, like, what's with your friend? And she said, and why does she have camels? And she said, Robin's this odd girl that showed up here a year ago. She's camping in this abandoned house. We bring her food and music. We're worrying about her. And she's got this crazy idea to walk 2,000 miles alone across the outback of Australia. And we're afraid she's going to die out there. We want to go with her, but she won't let anybody come. And I thought that was pretty nuts. And I was there all week. At the end of the week, the woman working for me said, the girl with the camels wanted to ask you a favor. And I was thinking, what possible favor could she ask me? And she wants the pictures I shot or something. And she said she'd written to National Geographic and they never answered her. And she thought maybe she could use your name as a reference because she's been washing windows and working in a pub. And I said, she could use my name. I've met some of the editors at workshops, but I don't know that that would really be of any help. So I flew back to New York and got a call a week later from the editor of National Geographic who said, we got this letter from this woman. She's asking us to fund her trip. Is she going to die out there? Is she a nutcase? Is she for real? We don't want the headline, National Geographic Explorer dies in week 2. And I was trying to be polite. I said, well, she's very intense and she's very focused and she has camels. Trying to think of what to say without saying she's kind of nuts. And he said, well, since you guys are such good friends, would you like to be the photographer that we hire to send out and photograph her in the outback? That you're kind of an outback kind of guy, right? I mean, you're like, you do like camping and survival. It's like, I'm a New York City kid, but I said, oh, absolutely, no problem. So I had one of the most interesting years of my life following this wonderful, fantastic, crazy, just amazing woman across the outback of Australia. Just absolutely fascinating. Most interesting year of my life. Her story turned out to be incredibly well received all over the world. 50 million people read about her. It was enormously impactful for her and obviously for me as a photographer. And at the end of the trip, we became pretty good friends. And she sort of challenged me and said, are you going back to being a prostitute now? This is sort of the conversation I had with her all the time. It was always like this, sort of poking me. And I said, like, really, you're still insulting me after 9 months? She said, no, I mean that in a good way. And I said, what part of accusing me of being a prostitute is a good thing? And she said, well, I feel like until my story, somebody would wind you up and make you care about that topic or this topic or that, and then you go on to your next thing. But she said, I feel like, when you photographed my trip, I felt like you were photographing it that for me, not for the magazine, like you risk your career. I did lots of things like editing my own pictures, which you're never supposed to do if you work for the Geographic. So I was kind of looking for some way to kind of prove to her that I wasn't just a hired gun, that I actually wanted to use my photographs to change the world. Well, I went back and actually just to finish her story for a second. So as Laura mentioned, they've just a few years ago turned this into a feature film. They've been trying for 30 years to make this into a movie. First, it was going to be Julia Roberts, then it was Helen Hunt, then it was Nicole Kidman. So every 4 or 5 years, they get a call from somebody in Hollywood saying, we're doing the movie, will you be a consultant, which meant will you sign your life rights away? And then nothing would happen. So when they called me, I assumed it was the same thing, but this time it was the team behind The King's Speech. They were wonderful. And they actually flew me and Robin out to the outback to be on the set to watch these people literally wearing our clothes, wearing our glasses. Well, I took both of these pictures, and when I took the picture of Mia Wasikowska, who's a wonderful actress, I was looking at her. I said, are you wearing the same blouse Robin wore in my pictures? And she said, oh, yeah, they went through your photographs and they built the sets. They put the clothes on us. I said, why? Who would care? It's like, I love people in Hollywood sometimes when they're so obsessive. Anyway, and there's Robin and me on the left and Adam Driver and Mia on the right. And all the people were absolutely wonderful and lovely and not at all Hollywood assholes. They were really dedicated people and they really wanted to tell Robin's story. In the movie, if any of you have any interest, it's on Amazon Prime right now. And it's like one of their 10 top indie movies, which is really, again, very surreal, as you can imagine. I went back to the States after Robin's trip was over, and I got together with Jean, who was now married to Gail. And they were sort of my family away from home. I would spend most of my vacations and Christmas and Thanksgiving with them. And I was telling them about the trip and what it was like, and Robin's challenged me to find something to try to not just document, but to change something with my photographs. And very shortly after that, Time magazine sent me to Korea to take pictures of Amerasians, a phrase I'd never heard before. These are children all over Southeast Asia, been fathered by American GIs. At the time that I did the story, there were 40,000 children that were all over Asia. And the US government said, these are not our children. these are the children of local people. They would take no responsibility for it whatsoever. And the local governments would say, no, these are American children. And so these poor kids were left in limbo. A lot of them were ridiculed, beaten up, made fun of. If any of you remember what it's like when you were a child and you had a big nose or a pimple or whatever it is, how sensitive we all were as children. Imagine your whole life being ridiculed and mocked and being made fun of, and everywhere you go, no matter where you go, people whisper about you or beat you up or ridicule or make you feel badly about yourself. So I did a pretty decent story photographing these kids, but it was a few days assignment. The little boy in the middle there towards the right is an Amerasian kid, and there's nobody will marry these kids, nobody will hire them. It's just a horrible sort of like spending your life in limbo. So in the course of doing the story, I met a gentleman that ran an organization called the Pearl Buck Foundation, and I was asking him, I was trying to find the most Western looking child to photograph, and the Time Magazine assignment was over, and I decided I would actually stop taking assignments for 6 months. I'd use the money that I made from Robin's trip, and I would find 6 kids in different countries and go amongst them, go back and forth amongst the kids. And I had this kind of maybe naive vision of really humanizing the story, having these 6 kids of different ages and from different nationalities, and to show what their lives were like, what they went through on a day-to-day basis. And so when I went to the Pearl Buck Foundation in Seoul, this gentleman told me there was one girl that he knew that he said, this girl is very strikingly beautiful. She looks very Western, and the problem is that she's being raised by her grandmother, and the grandmother will never let you see her. And of course, I took that as a challenge. I got a translator. I got her address. She lived in a little village up along the DMZ, and it's a little town called Paju, and it's right, that little village right there that you're seeing. And I went with my translator. We went to the house, and I was expecting, to be rejected. And to my astonishment, and to the translator's astonishment, the grandmother welcomed me in. I had a beard. I had long hair. I was, a backpack. I didn't look terribly reputable. I certainly didn't look like any of the military people that they were accustomed to seeing. And I explained that I was there as a journalist to tell the stories of children like her granddaughter. And I asked through the translator, could I spend a week here in your village photographing Unsuk as she goes to school, as you guys spend time together. And again, to the translator's astonishment and mine, she said, sure. And I had a sleeping bag, and I asked if I could sleep in a little, like a hut on the outside of their house. And she said, okay. And this was my first night, the first night I met Unsuk. And Unsuk would study by candlelight at night. One of the things I noticed right away is how in love Natasha, Unsuk at the time, and her grandmother were. They would sleep together on the floor. The way they heat floors in Korea is they put bricks under the floor so the heat radiates up. Look at how much, even though Unsuk looks very Western here, you can see very clearly how related they are to each other. And remember this picture, because there's another picture I'm going to show you later where you're going to be kind of remarkable. You'll remark on how strange the other photograph is. So this is her getting ready to go to school in the morning. Again, look at their faces here. And when I point out the picture later, it's quite surprising. So this is just before she went to school. And obviously, Unsuk is already pretty tall compared to the grandmother, who's pretty short. So this is the entrance to their house. So getting ready for school. I don't speak a word of Korean. My translators left at this point, and the last thing I said to my translator before she left, and I asked her to come back at the end of the week so I could formally thank the grandmother, is I said, please tell Unsuk two things. One is please pay no attention to me. And two, if I ever do anything to embarrass her, just put up your hand and say stop, and I'll stop taking pictures. So that was basically the only ground rules. This is lining up outside the school in the morning assembly. This is again waiting in line to go into the school. And one of the things I noticed right away, having photographed all these other children, is that unlike the other kids who went out of their way to be not noticed, to look down, the other Amerasian children would not make eye contact. It was very clear from the beginning that Unsuk was funny, popular, got herself into trouble. The teacher asked a question, and she was the first one to raise her hand. So this is her going up to the blackboard to answer the question. She got in trouble here for whispering into her friend's ear during class. And again, just, I couldn't help be taken with her beauty. She was just, 11 years old, and just you could just see the spark in this person. It was quite remarkable. I also noticed during intermission and during, recreation break periods, she was the one choosing the other girls who was going to be on her team. It was very obvious that she was in charge. She was a leader, and then she would like point to the girls saying, "You're going to be on my team." Again, this was unlike any other child that I had met, and I now spent, quite a few weeks photographing other children. This is walking home from school. To the right there is the DMZ. And at night, all of the people in the village would cover their windows because the Korean government has told the South Koreans that at any moment the North Koreans can invade. And they've been living basically in fear of this for decades now. And so at night, everybody would cover all their windows. So the village was completely black at night. And this is again, September, walking home with her friends from school. Just the flowers, just all of it was just wonderful. And again, she was pretty good at not paying attention to me for the most part, tuning me out. This is her friend Myung-sun after school. And again, she was always laughing. And it was actually funny because a few times in school, when I was taking pictures, she'd whisper in her girlfriend's ears, and then look at me and go, "Stop." And I would stand at attention and put my cameras down, and everybody would break up laughing. It was really funny. And it was also touching. She started holding my hand on the way to school. And, I didn't speak a word of Korean, but, you say things out loud in your own language and everybody figures out sort of what they're saying. So I took this picture and I left. The translator came back. It was the end of my week. And we sat down to thank the grandmother. I was going to say, can I come back here in a month or two and continue photographing? And the translator was talking to the grandmother, and suddenly the grandmother started crying. And I said to the translator, "What's going on? Why is she crying?" And the translator spoke to the grandmother for a moment, and the translator started crying. And I said, "Okay, I think I've done something wrong. Could you take a deep breath and tell me why are you both crying?" And the translator said, "The grandmother says that she is dying, and she wants to know if you will take Unsuk to America with you." And I said, first of all, I said, "Can I take you to the hospital? Can I pay for a doctor?" And she said, "No, I've seen a doctor, and the doctor says there's nothing they can do." I said, "Look, I'm 28 years old, and I'm not married, and I sleep on my sister's couch, and I'm really immature, and I don't even have a girlfriend." And I said, "I'm really not the right person to take care of your granddaughter." I said, "If you're serious, I will try to find a family for her." And, I was a little worried. Was I being played? Was this like, a thing that families did with Americans, thinking, "Oh, here's a rich guy with his cameras"? But I didn't really think that at all, because it was very genuine, everything that I'd seen. And so I gave the grandmother my card. When we got outside, I said to the translator, "Would you come back here tomorrow, and here's $600, and could you," maybe she was too shy to ask me for money, "could you try to get her to a doctor? I don't know, what her illness is." The translator was very taken and said yes. I trusted the translator was going to do this. And so I sat down, I wrote this like 15-page letter to my friends, Jean and Gail, and said, at that point, Gail had a son, Tim, from a previous marriage, and he was 11 years old. And so I said, "You guys had once, I think, said something like wishing you had another child." And I said, "I know this is really outrageous of me to be even, suggesting this." And they wrote back to me and said, "Okay." And I said, I called them and I said, "Okay, what?" And they said, "Okay, we'll adopt her." I said, "Wait, don't you want to see a picture of her? Do you want to meet her?" They said, "No, you told us the story, and okay, we'll adopt her." And I said, "Okay, wait, I think I need to go back and talk to the grandmother, because I want to make sure that I understand. I'm kind of playing God here." And so on Christmas Eve, I was in Bangkok, and with a group of other photographers, and in a bar, and everybody's complaining and moaning about, I was always amazed. I always felt like the luckiest person in the world, that every other photographer I would sit with would moan and groan about their terrible editors and how they chose the wrong pictures. And anyway, we're sitting there, it's Christmas Eve actually, and the guy comes from the front desk and says, "Is there somebody named Smolan here?" And I said, "Yeah." And there was a telegram from Time magazine. It said, "Somebody in Korea has died and left you a child in their will. Do you know anything about this?" I hadn't told them what I was doing. I just said, "I'm taking a leave of absence to work on my own projects for a few months." So I flew back to Korea, and this is the grandmother's funeral, a burial. They bury the body in the middle, and then the spikes kind of radiate out to the universe. It's a really beautiful sort of symbolic thing. So I found my translator and I said, would you come back to me? I need to go back to the village because I made the grandmother a promise and I'm kind of freaked out about like now what to do. And so we went back to the village and no one would tell us where Unsuk was. The grandmother had always hidden her except for me. And I guess for some, even though I'd been there and the villagers had seen me, they wouldn't tell us anything. And so we found Myung-san, her friend, and we kind of cornered her away from all the adults and said, remember Rick, he was here, like 2 months ago, and we're trying to find Unsuk. Do you know where she is? And she very reluctantly gave us an address on a piece of paper. And we went to this horrible slum on the outside of Seoul. I mean, this was in 1978, and it looked as if the war had ended 3 years before, not 15 years before, or 20 years, whatever it was. It was just, it was a really, not a very good area. And it was in Seoul, but it was just on the edges of Seoul. So we knocked on this door and this man answered the door and did not look very friendly. And he barked something at us. And I said to the translator, could you ask him if Unsuk is living here? And she talked to him and he yelled something and started to like close the door in our face. And I said, what's going on? And she said, yes. He said, Unsuk's here and you should go away. And I kind of stuck my foot at the door and I said, tell him that I'm a photographer. And I started saying to her what I was. And she said, he knows who you are. He wants you to leave. And I said, who is he? And she said, she talked to him a minute and she said, he says he's her uncle. And then she came to the door and her eyes were bloodshot. She'd obviously been crying and no recognition of me whatsoever. And I said to him, look, I realized, okay, the grandmother's his mother. So I said, I made a promise to your mother that I would find a family for this child. And I have, and I've come a very long way. I came from America. I actually was in Hong Kong, but I told them I came from America. And I said, it's really cold out here. Do you mind if I just come in for a minute? And so he very reluctantly let me in. And then we sat down and he yelled something at Unsuk and she went and brought us tea. And then my memory is that there was a baby crying and he also yelled something at Unsuk and she went and was taking care of the baby. And we sat down and he was very unfriendly. And so somebody taught me a long time ago, something with a situation like this, if you attack it head on, you're not going to get anywhere. So I said, I am so glad that you're taking care of Unsuk. He had said something to me like, you can leave because I'm going to raise her now. She's going to live with me. And I said, is she going to go to school? And he said, no, she's going to help, she's going to help around my house. And, after seeing how happy she had been with her friends and this idea of her, to me, it looked like Cinderella, like she was going to be enslaved. I kind of did the opposite of I remember the translator afterwards kind of amazed. I said, tell the uncle I am so happy that he's going to take care of her and that she has a home and that someone who loves her to take care of her. And she kind of looked at me like, are you crazy? And I said, just say that to him. And so he kind of relaxed a little bit. And then I said, I'm stuck here for a week because back then you had to buy a Saturday night stay over in order to get a reasonably priced ticket. So I said, look, what did you study in school? And he said he studied English and he was actually working at a hotel, he said, in Seoul. And I said, since I'm stuck here, could I take you to lunch tomorrow? Come to my hotel and I'll buy you lunch and you can practice English and we'll get to know each other. I'm so happy you're going to take care of Unsuk. And he kind of let his guard down. He said, okay. He said he agreed to come to lunch. So I went and found an older Amerasian who was the same age that I was. And it was a boy who'd been in and out of jail. And a girl who was also an Amerasian who had a pretty rough life, as sort of a street girl. And I said, there's a young child that has a very small chance of getting out of here and going to America. And would you come to lunch tomorrow and tell the uncle what's likely to happen to her if she doesn't leave? Just tell him what your life is like. Tell him what people say to you when you walk down the street, what you do for a living, what your life has been like. And they said, okay. So they came to lunch the next day. And within 5 minutes, we got thrown out of the restaurant. They were yelling at him. They were shouting. It was so out of control. It was not a calm conversation. They were like screaming at him, saying, how could you imprison this? Whatever they were saying. And so we got outside and he was red-faced and he started screaming at me. And I was like so depressed. I said, I've completely blown this whole thing. I've screwed everything up. And I said to the translator, what's he saying? And she said, he says, how dare you? How dare you walk into my house and accuse me of enslaving my own niece? Like, you're some rich American with your cameras around your neck. You got to whisk this girl to America. I have no idea who you or your friends are. Like, it's so outrageous. You would accuse me of something like this. And I said to the translator, tell him he's right. She said, what? I said, just tell him he's right. I said, you know, I completely, look, I said, I'm so glad that you're going to take care of her. But I said, unfortunately, what I've seen here in the society is that people don't accept these children. As wonderful as Unsuk is, all the children I photographed, except for her, seemed to be, you know, psychologically disturbed and having been, you know, ridiculed their whole lives. So he invited me reluctantly to a ceremony they're having the next day for his mother. And I don't understand why he lowered his guard a little bit, maybe because I apologized. I said, look, you know, I made your mother a promise. You know, she seemed to be pretty clear on what she wanted, but I understand you're the man of the family. So, you know, I'll follow your lead here. So this was at the ceremony. This is when Unsuk was serving us. I know probably those of you who are not photographers are going to wonder, you're going to see some pictures in here where you think, how do you keep taking pictures in the middle of this? It's kind of what photographers do, right? This is at the ceremony for the grandmother. Part of the ceremony is you burn photographs and items and clothing of your loved one. And it was just heartbreaking. It's so hard to take pictures in a moment like this. You feel like such a, I feel like the person that Robin had accused me of when I photographed her, like, you parasite. But I also know that sometimes these are the pictures that mean the most to people afterwards. Even at the moment, it's so uncomfortable to be taking these pictures. And this is now January. Those photographs earlier of Unsuk were in September. So in 4 months, she started looking so different to me. She kind of looked a little kind of haunted. She looks much older, obviously not very happy. So I had photographed an American Maryknoll priest that I had met, who would find children, find the mothers, the parents, the grandparents that were raising the children, and then try to find families for them in America. A really wonderful man named Father Keene. And so I said to the uncle, I know that you want to take care of Unsuk, but would you at least come with me and meet Father Keene and let him tell you about the adoption process, how they make sure that my friends are good people, that this is all legitimate. If you really love her, I think she will have a happier life in America. You know, again, I don't mean to be playing God here. I'm 28 years old. I'm some kid. I have no background in any of this as usual. It's the pretender again, right? So we went to Father Keene's. This is on the bus on the way down to Father Keene's. We also took a train. And it was obvious that Unsuk was still very much in shock and so missing her grandmother. This is Father Keene. This is a wonderful man. Father Keene had 75 children living in this house that this sort of compound, and he had 3 women helping him. So 4 adults and 75 children. So you can just imagine what that place was like. Just a really loving, wonderful man. You know, it's interesting, you know, I'm not impressed by most religious people. I find it personally a lot of religious people. Anyway, I won't go into all that, but Father Keene would go to the whorehouses. He would go to the military bases and tell the guys to use condoms. You know, he was a man of the people. He would actually get out there and get dirty and not build edifices. He was actually somebody who actually really, he lived his life according to what he believed. And I was just so impressed by the way he worked with the children. This is Unsuk being interviewed by a social worker. And, you know, from my perspective, when I first met her, it looked like all of this had just washed over her. But in fact, the grandmother was like the village wise woman. People came to her all during the day for advice. She was like the midwife. And it was very obvious that she demanded that her granddaughter be treated with dignity and respect. But nevertheless, kids are kids. And so during these interviews, I remember afterwards, the social worker told me through a translator that of course she knew she was different and she had different background, but her grandmother said, you never ever respond to any taunts or ridicule. You always let it, you know, let it roll off of you. This is a bus on the way to, I forget where we were going, someplace downtown. So I convinced the uncle to let Unsuk stay at the orphanage. He called it an orphanage. And the uncle agreed to let her be adopted. And then I went off and I started now, because I was running out of money, I started doing assignments again. So I would come and visit Natasha every 2 or 3 weeks and then go off and fly around Asia for Time magazine and other magazines. And I came back after being away 2 weeks after she'd been at the orphanage. And Father Keene said, I need to talk to you about Unsuk. And I went to his office and he closed the door and I thought this is something bad. And he said, you know, there's me and 3 other women here, and as you notice, this place is utter bedlam. And he said, the third day Unsuk was here, she assigned one of the older girls to each of the younger kids and said, you're now in charge of taking care of this kid, getting them dressed, bathed, cleaning their room. And he said she started organizing movie days where she would take the older girls out for movies. And he said, basically, she's been here 2 weeks and she's now running the orphanage. He told me that I'm messy and sloppy. She said, I have work details and lists on the wall. He said, I don't know who raised this kid, but I've never, in all the children that come through here, I've never met. He had this great story. He said, I think of children as, he said, there was glass, plastic, and steel. He said, glass are kids that their life has been so hard that their personality is literally shattered. Like they're not a whole person. They've been so abused, either psychologically or physically, that there's no putting them back together. He said, and you got the plastic kids that they are who they are, just bounces off of them and life goes on. And said, and then very once in a while you meet a kid that's steel, where the more things they go through, the stronger their personality gets. And he said, I've never, in all the hundreds of kids that have come through my orphanage, I have never met a child like this. He said, I can't wait to see what her life's going to be like. That picture, by the way, is children that were adopted would send their pictures back from the United States to show the other kids what their lives were like. And this girl, this woman, one of her children had been adopted. And so all the kids would gather around and listen to the letters. And the woman would read all the letters from the kids. It's a dog just around the corner from the orphanage. So Jean and Gail, after deciding they were going to adopt Unsuk without ever seeing her or meeting her, I thought it would, and also to convince the uncle that this is the right decision because he was still on the line, I suggested to Jean and Gail that they come over to Korea to meet her and meet the uncle. And Jean said, I can come over with my son, but Gail works at Bell South and she can't take the time off. So Jean and Tim flew over, and the moment that they decided to adopt her, they started studying Korean. In fact, there was a mural that Jean did in the kitchen in Korean that said, once upon a time, a little girl from Korea came to live happily ever after Atlanta, Georgia. And it was like, when she came, it was on the wall. And this was a letter that she got from Jean in Korean saying that they were going to come and visit. This was a scene we saw a lot with Jean huddled over a dictionary, trying to talk to the uncle. This was Jean showing the uncle where Atlanta was on the map. This is the uncle with his chop signing the adoption papers at Father Keen's. So we went to celebrate that night. And the first night that Jean and Tim were in Korea, we actually slept on we went to my hotel and stayed at my hotel the first night. We got a room next to ours, and the kids slept in the room next door, and Jean and I slept in my room. I've been in this hotel now for about 6 weeks. And then the second night, we all went to the orphanage and we slept on the floor with the kids. And she introduced her new father and brother to all the other children. The third night, we went back to my hotel, and the gentleman at the front desk said that there were no other rooms on my floor. I was on the 11th floor. I left all my stuff there because I had, my room always looks like a bomb went off. If any of my photographer friends have ever spent time with me, they know it's like within 5 minutes, it looks like utter chaos. So we went out to dinner, and Jean was teaching. Unsuk had changed her name now to Natasha. She and I have a debate about this all the time because my memory of it is that she was watching Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoons on the American Air Force Station, and we were trying to explain to her that Natasha was actually the Russian spy. She said that's not true. She chose it for another reason. But in any case, Jean was showing her how to use a knife and fork, and then she was showing Jean how to use chopsticks. And it was a wonderful night. So we went back to our hotel room, and as I said, the people at the front desk said there was no other rooms on our floor. I was on the 11th floor, and the guy at the front desk said there's another empty room on the 5th floor. Maybe the kids can sleep there and you can come get them in the morning. And Jean looked at me and said, I don't like the idea of the kids being on a different floor. And Tim said, Dad, I have a sleeping bag. I said, oh yeah, I have a sleeping bag. So Jean got one bed, Natasha got the other. Tim and I got on the floor and both got in our sleeping bags to turn off the lights. The kids passed out. It'd been a really fun, exciting couple of days together. And Jean and I were laying in bed, and we were talking about how famous we were going to be. We were just talking about what great guys we were and how we'd saved this little girl's life. And, Barbara Walters was going to do a story about us on 2020. It was just total, we're so cool. And we fall asleep. and I've been in this hotel room now for 6 weeks. During the day, they overheated the hotels terribly. The room is always super hot, so I left the window open during the day. And then at night, around literally at like 12:15 every night, they would turn the heat off. And by 12:30, the room would drop to, this is the middle of winter in Korea, so the room would be like freezing. It'd be like 20 degrees. So literally for now a month, when I was there by myself, I'd get up in the middle of the night, shivering, and then close the window and go to bed. So I'm laying in my sleeping bag. I'm asleep. The room gets really cold. I get up to close the windows. And as I'm closing the windows, I'm hearing people outside shouting. And at first I thought, oh, the bars must have just gotten out. And I started to get back. I literally got back in my sleeping bag. And even though the windows are now closed, I'm hearing these voices, and the voices don't sound like anger. They sound like terror. Again, I've been in Korea now all these months. I haven't learned a word. Jane, of course, now, has already learned how to speak in full sentences. And so I get up and look out the window. And I also remember there's curfew at midnight. No one's on the streets in Seoul back then at midnight, because they had this curfew because they, again, didn't want the North Koreans invading. And I look out the window and there's flames coming up the side of our building and the hotel's on fire. So I run, we're on the 11th floor. So I rush over to Gene. I wake him up. I said, don't freak out, but I think our hotel's on fire. And he goes, what? I said, Gene, our hotel's on fire. And he jumps up and says, oh my God. And we run to the window, and now there's flames coming by our window. And we try to get the kids up. And if any of you know what children are like when they've been asleep for an hour, it's like they took 5 Valium, like, their heads all over the place. And plus, they're still suffering from jet lag. And we try to get the kids up. And I remember she's really annoyed, and she's like pushing us away. We can't explain to her what's going on. His son had LL Bean bootlaces, and we're trying to lace up. I remember these bootlaces we're trying to lace up. The first thing I was thinking is, I have 150 rolls of film that I've shot over because I hadn't developed any of the film. And it's like, I'm not leaving my film. And Gene said, leave the fucking film. Are you crazy? It's like, we got to get out of here. I didn't even think about my passport or my cameras or my money or anything. And so we finally get the kids up. We run to the door and we open it. And Jane goes first, then Tim, then me, and then her. And she's holding onto the door. She doesn't want to leave, basically. She's holding onto the door with all might. And it's like walking to a blast furnace. There's glass breaking, people screaming, these weird loud thumps, and smoke is pouring into our room. And Gene turns around and pushes us back in the room, and we're all choking at this point. And he goes, we're not going to make it. We're going to die from the smoke. And the door closes. The whole room is now full of smoke. I can barely see him 2 feet away. His son, Tim, is choking and laying on the floor. She's screaming. And I remember Tim leaned over his son, who is, choking. And Gene said, we got to soak towels. As I said, Gene and I are the same age, but Gene is much more mature. He's like my big brother. And Gene said, we have to soak towels. I have no idea what he's talking about. He said, Rick, we're going to die from the smoke. We have to get towels. We ran to the bathroom. We soaked towels and put them over our faces. And then he said, do you have gaffer's tape? I'm thinking, like, we're dying in a hotel fire. He said, Rick, we got to tape up. We have to stop the smoke. So we put blankets under the door to stop the smoke coming from under the door. We put room service menus over the vents. We opened the window and we put the kids on the windowsill to try to get some air. And out the windowsill was the building, a new building going up with the scaffolding. And on the scaffolding were photographers waiting for people to jump. No fire engines, no one trying to get us out, just these goddamn parasites. And I'm like looking into a mirror here thinking, God, I swear, if we get out of this alive, I'll do something else with my life. Like, not that being a photographer was a bad thing, but it's like I was just looking into this. I've never been a paparazzi, but it's that moment. And I went back and she was sitting on the bed, and I put my arm around her and she pulled away from me. And I remember having 2 overwhelming feelings. One was complete terror and thinking, please God, this has to be a dream. I just want to wake up. This can't be happening. And the second was unbelievable guilt that I just killed this little girl, my best friend, and his son, and this is all my fault for playing God. I mean, this is like he and I laying on the floor talking about how cool we were. This is God. I'm not religious, but this is like God's way of saying, oh yeah, you think you're cool? Like wham. So there's this loud pounding on the door. We turned on the radio, somehow thinking the Air Force station would have a report, and they're playing Chicago's Uptown Woman. And he and I look at each other and we start laughing, like we're dying in a hotel fire listening to Chicago's Uptown Woman. There's a bottle of Kahlua that I had on the night table. We proceeded to drink the entire bottle of Kahlua, which is not a good thing to drink if it's, in large quantities. There was this loud pounding on the door, and we all had the same reaction, except Natasha, which is that, don't let anybody in. Like this is our refuge now. We've taped up the doors. We're not letting our neighbors in. I'm sorry, but we have to survive. There were people shouting in Korean. We don't know what it was. We actually, when we put the kids in the windowsill, we saw people below us jumping out windows. When we pulled the kids, 11 people died in this fire. So people were jumping out of windows as the fire came up floor by floor. The second time the people were shouting outside and pounding on our door, Unsuk went over and I tried to stop her from opening the door, and she kicked me in the shins. And she opened the door, and it was firemen trying to get us out. They were saying, is anybody in there? They were trying to find people that had passed out or people need to be taken out. And I had my film. I wasn't leaving the film. And there was a fire escape right there, like, 2 doors down from our door that took us down the 11 flights of stairs into the lobby of the building. There were people passed out on the floor, people unconscious everywhere. And then they keep bringing more bodies down, and I'm looking up, and now the fire trucks have shown up. And they're pouring water into all the floors above us. And I'm looking up, seeing water coming up through the roof, through the ceiling. And I said, Gene, the ceiling is going to come down on top of us. We went over to find one of the night manager and said, you need to take people out of here. And the guy said, no, curfew. We can't leave the hotel. It's like, fuck the curfew. I'm sorry. And also people were passed out. So Gene took his coat, wrapped his hand in the coat, smashed open the liquor cabinet because the guy said he didn't have the key to the liquor cabinet. We started giving brandy and whiskey to the people that were semi-conscious. We basically let everybody out of the hotel. There was another hotel literally across the street. And we just said, we're not staying here. We basically opened the door and let everybody out like, Pied Piper. A film crew showed up about 20 minutes later, and they were interviewing all of the people in the lobby. And Natasha went over to listen to see what was happening. And then she started talking in the Korean. And I remember the expression on their faces because, she was with us and she looked very, Western. And it was like they couldn't believe this child was speaking to them in fluent Korean, not knowing she was Korean. So basically, I know it's a little hard to believe, but I was still taking pictures on the fire escape on the way out of I just figured, what, if we die, it doesn't matter. And if we don't die someday, and it's also my way of distancing myself. Sometimes I can use the camera as a way of being there but not being there, something I've been accused of my whole life by my friends and my wife and my family. Put the cameras down and actually be present and don't always be outside looking in. Anyway, this is coming down the fire escape. This is in the lobby where there were people on bodies in the back there. We managed to grab our coats. Our clothes stank and smelled terrible. Our plan had been to rent a car and drive back to her village to introduce Tim and Jean to all the villagers. And so, this fire, we basically, I think the whole fire, we got out of I think the fire took place till from midnight to 2 o'clock. And then we slept in the lobby of the other hotel. We got our car at 6 a.m., totally exhausted, stinking of smoke, drove back to her village. And we kept saying, do you realize 4 hours ago we were dying in a hotel fire? The whole thing was so surreal. It was sort of this juxtaposition of dying. And now we're taking family pictures with, Unsuk wanted to be photographed with all of her friends in the village. Again, just by sheer coincidence, the day that we got there was a birthday party for a 60-year-old man. And when you lived to be 60 in Korea those days, that was a major accomplishment. And so they have these greenhouse tents that in the spring are used for growing plants, but in the winter they have all their parties inside. So we got inside the tent, and then the tent filled up with people, which is very surreal. And then they started teaching Jean the dances. Jean is a good dancer. I am not a good dancer. We drank a lot of rice wine, and we both got pretty drunk, and we were so relieved to be alive. And so we were told that the adoption would take 6 months to a year after the paperwork was signed, which is just insane. So I found out the name of every official in Korea and in the United States that was involved in signing all the papers and expediting this. I told them how famous they would be when the story was published. And in 4 months, the adoption, instead of a year, in 4 months, suddenly, miraculously, what a surprise, everything was okay. So this is in my hotel room. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. So this was Jean and Tim the next day. This is the last picture before they flew back to the States. That was saying goodbye at the orphanage. She'd been there, I guess, 4 or 5 months altogether. Father Keen waiting for her. We were grabbing a bus to take to back to Seoul. This is her great aunt who brought this wonderful, beautiful Korean dress for her. And I kept saying, you know, you could put the dress on. The flight was going to be like 23 hours by the time we flew to Tokyo and then to New York and then to Atlanta. But she insisted on wearing this beautiful Korean dress the entire way. This is at the airport, thinking she'd never see any of her family members again. I was really, really lucky. There was a wonderful photographer that was part of our agency named Dirk Halstead, who gave me one of the greatest tips of all time. He told me, go to airlines, show them your pictures on the cover of Time magazine, and ask them for free tickets on their airline in return for taking pictures for them. And so Cathay Pacific gave me an open pass for me and a girlfriend or a friend anywhere I wanted to go for several years. And so I knew a lot of the pilots, and very often they would let me sit in the cockpit. This is how long ago this was, that you would actually just go sit in the cockpit with it. So the pilot on this flight was a guy named Jeff Fowler. And Jeff let Natasha sit in the jump seat for part of the flight. He actually went back and adopted one of the other kids at Father Keen's after meeting Unsuk, which is pretty remarkable. This is her first airline meal, which she hated. This was 27 hours later in Atlanta. Just to make the story even more corny, Gail was pregnant, and they hadn't told me about this. And Gail was 3 days away from giving birth to her own daughter, so basically, both of her daughters arrived pretty much the same week. This is the first night before anyone went to sleep. And this is Jean and Gail showing Natasha her aunts and uncles and cousins and everybody that lived on the street, and sort of ushering her in to her new family. As I said, if you wrote this in a movie, you would say it's too corny. But Gail was literally 2 days away from giving birth to Kylie, who's now a doctor, which is really remarkable. Gene builds homes. He's also a stand-up comedian. He also flies model planes. He's now a really good photographer. He's a man of many different talents and skills. So this is one of the houses that he was building at the time. Natasha hated my beard. And so I made her a promise that once we got to Atlanta, she could cut off my beard. So this is Natasha living out my promise. There's Kylie in the little crib there in the background at the hospital. Tim and Natasha having an arm wrestling. Taylor was actually born before, so there's Tim, Taylor, Kylie, and Natasha. And I loved on Natasha's bedroom wall, she had the very first picture that I took of her the day that I met her. She learned English in 3 months, completely fluently. She started 7th grade at her own age level, which is quite remarkable. This is the first day of school in Atlanta. She took the bus to school, pledging allegiance for the first time in school. She had tutors after school to help her, catch up with the other kids. One of the things that astounded me is within 2 weeks, she was choosing who was going to be on her team. And at first the girls thought she was snobby because sometimes she didn't answer them when they spoke to her. They didn't realize that she was from another country. And then slowly when it dawned on them, she became quite popular. This was the first football game of the season. And Kylie is the little child, obviously, in her arms there. Remember that picture of her and her grandmother at the beginning? How much she looked like her grandmother? People always commented on how much she looks like Gail. It's like chameleon. It was just really astounding how she sort of just instantly adapts to whatever environment she's in. Again, tense moment in the game. And there's Kylie. There's Taylor. This is Natasha being baptized. I think she was 13 or 14 at this point. So, a lot of adopted families try to erase the history of their child, thinking they're doing them a favor. Like, we're never going to talk about you being adopted. You've always been here. The Driscoll family did the complete opposite. They all got Korean clothes themselves. A lot of the, as I said, Jean learned to speak Korean pretty fluently. So I would do the Christmas card every year. And I thought this was just a wonderful setup. There's Taylor, who's now about 6'3", I think. So Natasha hates this photograph. I asked her if it was okay if I put it in, but she hates the picture. This was her first job at Burger King. She used the money that she earned here to buy a bright red Carmen Ghia. She went to computer camp. I traded photography for her to go to computer camp for a couple of weeks. Of course, she's the one starting the water fights in the river rafting down the American River. She always used to like blondes, I noticed. She'll kill me for all this. Telling ghost stories around the campfire at night at camp. Of course, she became captain of the cheerleaders, homecoming queen. This was their Christmas card. This is an old car that Gene had been restoring for many years. I loved Tim combing his hair, so the doo-wop. So after college, Natasha got hired by Delta Airlines because she spoke Korean fluently. And so she was on the route, and she's been working for Delta now for 30 years, I think. It's a really long time. And so this was her first trip back to Korea, which I was fortunate to go on with her. And we got to Seoul, and there was her uncle at the airport. Very proud of her. That's her uncle, and I love her sort of Annie Hall kind of outfit, sort of tomboyish in a really beautiful way. This is her half sister, who she'd never met before. A lot of the women that she'd grown up with in the village were just so excited. She was the first person from their village ever to go to America. And I love the way she's sitting as a sign of respect to your elders. I mean, she just fell completely back into the pattern that, the way she'd been raised. That's her mother in the background there, who had married a Korean man and then for various reasons had not raised her. So that was the first time I ever met her mother. So this is a couple years later. Natasha got hired by Kodak to work at the Olympics in Korea, and by a gentleman named Ray DeMoulin, who had sponsored a lot of the Day in Life projects. And I forget whether it was in Korea or at an Olympics in the United States, but she met Jeff Pruss, who was working for Canon Cameras at the time, and they fell in love. So this is her wedding day, and this is, she went to get her hair done in the morning. And then this is her and her girlfriend getting ready just before the ceremony. A lot of these pictures taken by Doug Menuet. I had too many tears in my eyes during a lot of this day. Here's Jean looking a little bit older. Here's Jeff. For some reason, this thing is now freezing up on me. Let's see. I think the computer got overwhelmed.
Oh no.
Let's see. Oh, wait, maybe it's going to the next one. Okay, that's right. I'll hit it again and see. There we go. Sometimes I find Zoom actually like freezes things up.
Oh.
We're almost at the end here. Come on, baby. You know what we could do while I'm resetting this? Actually, all right, let's try one more time. Sometimes if you quit out of it, it'll start again, but I'll do this anyway.
There you go.
Very beautiful bride. This is Sydney, her first child, who's now 16, hard to believe. Just as beautiful as her mother. There's Evan. was born, I think, 2 years later, 3 years later. I stole a few pictures from Natasha's Facebook page this morning. So she's probably, where did you get these pictures from? Come on. Do you want to bring Natasha on for a second? Well, this thing is freezing up. Okay, we're almost there, actually.
We are.
I don't know why.
We have a special surprise. We have Natasha is joining us. Let me make sure we.
So that's Natasha and Robin, the girl with the camels. There's the two of us, both looking a little older. Natasha's handling the older part a lot better than me.
Can't hear you.
That's the end there. Can you hear me now? You trying to get Natasha?
There's Natasha. So, surprise, we have Natasha with us.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. So, Rick, that was just an amazing story. So love to get some questions, or Natasha, if you have any comments you'd like to say as questions are coming in.
Well, you know, Rick's always first of all, the name. He always says, I got it watching the cartoons, and that is not true. I got the name from Father Keen at the orphanage. So when I went there, it seemed like most of the children that were there had American names, but I still had my Korean name. So one day I asked him, can I have an American name? So he thought about it and he says, Natasha. I said, okay. And I actually love my name. But then later on, people kept telling me, well, it's a Russian name. It's a Russian name. I'm like, oh, okay. But, you know, even further than that, as it turns out, there used to be, right before I went there, there was another girl. Her name was Natasha, and she had just gotten adopted and went to the States. And I think my name was came from her. Which I've met her.
Natasha the second.
Beautiful, yeah.
Wow. I have a couple questions here. Melanie Jenkins says, Natasha, your story is amazing, and thank you for continuing to share your story. What message would you want to tell other Korean adoptees?
Melanie, I can't believe you're asking me this. I don't know. I mean, I think I've met many other adoptees, and by the way, Melanie is also a Korean adoptee. She's not Hapa, but she's an adoptee, and I have met many of them. And I don't know. I mean, I don't really have any particular message. But I do enjoy meeting other adoptees, and I had no idea. I mean, when I came here, I didn't know that there were other Amerasians, other kids, actually until Father Keen's. So I thought I was one of the only kid that looked different from the rest of the Koreans. So, but I have no message.
Let's see here. Natasha, I loved your story. I'm so happy you came to America. Welcome. Rick, a lot of folks are saying hello to you. David Kennerly, Hans, greetings from Canada. Is there a book in the works?
Rick's not there. So we haven't really talked about books. Rick did make a little, like a small photo book where it's got this Natasha story as the cover, but there's no book, and there's no talks of any movies. But you know, hey, if anybody on here that's wants to
there you go.
write the story, we'll welcome the idea.
Who should play you? Who should play the adult you?
Oh, I don't know.
Deborah Legalsi asks, tell us some more about your grandmother. She seems amazing.
She was amazing. And actually, you know, I'll tell you a little story, and this is probably going to make me cry here. But to this day, that I don't particularly like to eat eggs. Back in those days, protein was hard to come by. 13 years after the war is when I was born. So meat was very scarce. If you can get meat, it was very expensive. But we raised a couple of chickens. And so we would get the eggs and she would make me eggs, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I remember, like, you know, when you open up my lunch, you know, with rice, and there would always be an egg on top. So when I go to school, I trade my eggs with other kids for maybe their kimchi or some other thing. Looking back on it now, I feel really bad because she, you know, she gave it all to me and she probably didn't have any of it. And I don't know, she just really took care of me. And I should be crying right now.
You have me crying, Natasha.
God. But anyway, she made sure that I was taken care of. She made sure that I was educated. She would do homework with me, and she was just a smart lady, and I had no idea who she was until now. And I'm finding out more things about her, which is hard to believe. But one of the things that's, someone said, if you're Amerasian in Korea, there's a thing called hojok. Hojok is a family registry. So like you when somebody's born or dying, you go and register, right? Like here in the United States. But in Korea, apparently during that time, that if you were Amerasian and you didn't have a father, you could not have your name on the registry. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I guess it was 2 years ago, I got help from someone in Korea, this photographer that's been following stories about American GIs and women that were dating these GIs. And so anyway, he helped me go look up my registry. And lo and behold, my name is on there. And how did my grandmother do that? Well, my last name was Lee, but she kind of went around, and her last name is O. So she put me under her as a O somehow. And so she did so much to make sure nothing was left undone.
Wow. We have lots of folks just so happy that you both have shared the story. Lots of folks saying hello. Joy Solomon says, so happy Rick found you. Love you forever, Aunt Joy.
I love you too, Aunt Joy.
Andrew Kushner said that he was mesmerized, and I want to thank you so much for the story, which is amazingly touching. It's especially so for me, as my wife and I are parents of 2 adopted children, now 35 and 31.
That's great.
Andrew Kushner, thanks for selling me my first camera set in 1972, which I used that summer during my trip to Europe. Your journey with Natasha needs some more exposure. Thanks again. Sylvia says, it's a compelling story, so beautifully told. Thank you, and Natasha, for sharing it with us. Leave wanting to know more. Norton Gusky asks, Natasha, are you still in touch with your mother, your uncle, or your other Korean relatives?
Well, unfortunately, all of them have passed away, but I do have a half brother and sister that live in Korea, so I am in touch with them, and I've seen them few times since.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see, from Doug Menuez. Natasha, we love and miss you. So proud to know you. Thanks, Rick, for telling the story and the amazing photographs. We're all in tears again. Ken Edding says, I think Adam Driver has another opportunity here.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Actually, Natasha and Adam Driver climbed to the top of Uluru, Ayers Rock.
Wow.
And I slept through it, which I'm ready to I'll regret that the rest of my life. He invited me to come to with Natasha, and I was too jet lagged, so the two of them went off hiking.
Oh my God.
I'm always asking Rick, hey, whenever he's doing a new project, I would always ask him, hey, can I come along? And he always says yes. So when they were making the movie Tracks, I tagged along, and that's where I met Adam Driver. And then one day we decided to climb the Ayers Rock, but Rick, I think you were having some problem with your legs. And so we went up there and had a great time.
Just lots of.
What happens at Ayers Rock stays at Ayers Rock.
That's right. Nothing happened.
Anna Marie says.
I'll never tell Jeff.
Anna Marie says, I cry every single time, and I've known you over 30 years. Wish you were your grandmother's pride and joy. Cherie Snyder says, Rick, an incredible story. So glad to see you on the screen now, and also pictures from the past brings back memories. What an impact you have made on the world. From Cherie Reader Snyder. Carpa says she misses you both.
Hi, Carpa.
Hi, Carpa.
Jay and I are so touched. This is from Kelly and Jay. We love the story and enjoy hearing it again and again.
Hi, Kelly. Jay.
The big surprise is I didn't realize Doug did weddings.
No, I think I was very fortunate that he did my wedding. I don't think Doug does weddings.
Yeah, I couldn't do it through the tears.
Sarah says, I love hearing more of Natasha's story. Thank you for sharing. I can attest to her organizational skills. She was one of the people helping guide my first tour back to Korea since being born there. Wow. And lots of people are just very proud Dickinsonians. Anna Marie says, do you want to say anything about Texas? I don't know what that means.
I think it was the search for your dad, but that's another whole story.
Yeah. I'll just really briefly. I had somebody who was in the military GI, MP in Korea. I had him on my flight, and he wanted to know how I spoke Korean. And so when he heard the story, he said, I'm going to help you find your father. And so he got in touch with me years, like several months later, and he said, I found your father. Here's his address, and he's in Texas. So unfortunately, just long story short, before I could meet him, he died. So Rick and I, we flew down to Texas and attended his funeral. So that's the short version of a long story.
Wow.
Yeah.
Kristen says, thank you so much for sharing. It sounds like your families embraced each other's culture. How have you and your family continued the connection with your culture of origin?
Well, so I have 2 kids now. And I live in California near San Francisco. And my kids, they just stopped this year, but they have been going to Korean school for about the past 9 years. So every Saturday they go to Korean school for 3 hours learning Korean, and they love Korea, and they've been there a few times, and they want to go back every year.
Very nice. And Rick, I think
one of the most,
go ahead.
One of the most surreal things for me is my kids used to have lots of sleepovers with Natasha's kids when we lived in Mill Valley. And part of my head, it was like turning around. Part of my brain couldn't grasp that Natasha and I are now equals, and we have children, not too far apart in ages. Somehow she grew up, and I feel like I never did. But sometimes I have trouble remembering that the girl in these photographs is Natasha, who I think of as my sister. As I said, she was more mature than me at 11, and still is, as was her father.
Mark Wexler says hi to you both.
Hi, Mark.
And your Sharon and David says, hi, Natasha. This is your Hawaii family. We've loved Natasha's story. The care that was given to you has been received from you, and we love you. Aloha, from Sharon and David. So lots of lots of just great comments from people just saying hello. Julie says, Julie Bounds says it's great to hear the story again. Your old neighbors from P-Town, Julie and Lee. So I just want to thank you both so much for sharing the story. It was just such a feel-good story, and I think it's just what I needed tonight and what many of us needed tonight, and I thank you for your time.
Thanks for having us.
To say before we end?
Well, I want to say two things. One is obviously the grandmother was pulling strings here all along as the great puppet master. I sort of feel like I was conjured up at her instigation. And I feel a great debt to her for allowing me into her life and into Natasha's life. And Natasha totally changed my outlook on life as a photographer. I think a lot of people think it was a one-way thing, but it wasn't at all. Natasha, as you can see, has an amazing effect on everybody she touches. And the second thing is that, you know, my whole career began at Dickinson because I was allowed to create my own major and to kind of pursue my own interests. And I can't think if I'd not been allowed by Dennis Akins to create my own photography major, you know, I would have never met Natasha. I wouldn't have met Robin. I wouldn't have met my wife, Jennifer Irwitt. I wouldn't have been part of this wonderful photography community. And so I'm incredibly indebted to Dickinson, and I'm so impressed with Margie Ensign and her work now at Dickinson and her work previously with the Boko Haram girls. It's just a great testament. Dickinson chose such a powerful leader to lead the Dickinson community right now. So it was a great honor to be invited to speak tonight.
Oh, well, thank you. Just two more I'll say, because I want to make sure you get the shout outs. Denise Olson said, hi, Natasha. Love your story. Hi to Sid, Evan, and Jeff.
Oh,
and Sam Perry says, thank you so much. As always, Rick brings us the picture of humanity we need and which encourages us forward. So just thank you both again so much. Thank you to all of you who joined us. I hope to see you at a future either virtual webinar or sometime in person, either on campus or in your region. Thank you all very much, and I hope you have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks to Pierce, too.
Oh, yes. Natasha, someone said Jessica Biel should play you now in the movie.
Flash dance.
Write the story.
All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all for coming.
Appreciate it.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye. Bye.